Allow me to introduce my fellow panelists first. From Malaysia, we have Farah Jaafar, the CEO of Labuan International Business and Financial Center. From Vietnam, we have Michael Kokalari, Chief Economist of Vina Capital. And from Hong Kong, Julien Martin, Managing Director at the Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing. But before we jump into the panel discussion, please allow me to introduce the World Alliance of International Financial Centers briefly, and also to kick off the discussion we will have later. The World Alliance of International Financial Centers is a non-profit association. We are registered in Belgium and comprising 21 leading international financial centers across 4 continents. We organize the collaboration between our members, the leading financial centers worldwide. We run projects together, we exchange best practices, and we jointly promote the vital role of financial centers in financing the economy. The 21 World Alliance members, you see here some of the pictures with names which should be familiar to you. Even if you're not in the financial industry, they represent 19 countries with a total nominal GDP of 39 trillion US dollars. 4,000 banks, 20,000 Fintech startups. These are startups in financial technology for payment and mobile services, and more than 60,000 investment firms. Next slide, please. Yes. The last 1.5 years for all of us have been very challenging due to the pandemic. At the World Alliance, we focus very much on the economic recovery. So we think and plan how financial centers can contribute, supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, for instance, which are most vulnerable, and startups, and how to migrate towards a more sustainable financial industry in general, which is our clear target. You see here on the slide, we have published a series of reports with recommendations not only for financial centers, but also for governments on preparing the economic recovery and addressing the most pressing issues. And if you're interested in more details, please have a look on our website. You'll find them in the publications section of the website. Next slide, please. In financial technology, or Fintech, as we call it in the financial industry, we already see the next generation of financial service providers growing and also attracting huge investments globally. We have even experienced a further acceleration this year with record fundings of more than 90 billion US dollar venture capital in the first 3 quarters. This is more than double of the whole last year. Globally, we already count almost 200 Fintech unicorns. Unicorns, these are startups with a valuation of more than 1 billion US dollar. So the Fintech blue chips, as you could say. At the same time, of course, we witness the digital transformation of the whole financial industry. This is not only startups, this is banks, insurance companies, exchanges, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Furthermore, of course, we all see the urgency to fight global warming, as we are experiencing more and more issues in our countries. So in the financial industry, ESG reporting and taxonomies have already been crucial before the pandemic and have now become even more critical as we want to get the economic recovery right, of course. Fortunately, many of our members have become leaders in driving the change towards a sustainable financial industry, including many of the Asian financial centers. Next slide, please. Another topic we are active in, it's close to our heart, is inclusive finance. Let me give you an example. What many of our members in developed markets experience, for instance, is a growing pain of small and medium-sized enterprises with closures of their bank accounts when they send or receive trade-related payments from developing countries. Regulations for anti-money laundering and know your customer makes it often simply too expensive for banks to handle such kind of transactions, which require manual interaction. This will ultimately have an impact on global trade and hinder economic development. Next slide, please. Let's now turn to the trends in the financial industry that most likely will have a substantial impact on the future of finance and the future of financial centers, of course. In this diagram, I have divided them into 5 categories. big data and artificial intelligence, regional development, economic change, sustainability, and the digital transformation. And I've positioned them on a timeline of the next 10 years, this decade, depending on when they are expected to have the most significant impact globally. In our panel today, we will mainly focus on the digital transformation. As mentioned before, we are already in the middle of the Fintech revolution. Furthermore, process automation is a hot topic in finance, regularly relying on artificial intelligence, and in particular on machine learning. But those are perhaps only the harbingers of even greater changes to come. Digital currencies issued by central banks like the digital renminbi, for instance, and decentralized finance. Let me stop here and ask my fellow panelists for their opinion on the impact of the digital transformation on the financial industry in their countries. And also, please take the time to introduce your work, what you're doing. Farah, do you want to start?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And where do we start with digitalization? So in Labuan IBFC, who we are, Labuan IBFC, Labuan International Business and Financial Center, is really Malaysia's mid-shore option. We are the foreign system of Malaysia. So Malaysia has two parallel systems, the onshore Malaysian system and the mid-shore Labuan system, basically with an entire financial ecosystem that rests on Labuan Island, which is off Borneo. We're home to about 850 license holders now, and the ecosystem is growing every day. And our digital ecosystem is one of the fastest growing. We're now home to, I would say, about 80 digital licenses already, almost 10%. And that is in the last, since 2017. 2017 actually is when we licensed our first digital player. So the digital transformation that we've seen in Asia and in the world really, with the pandemic, has been accelerated and decelerated at the same time, in my mind anyway. Accelerated because obviously we're all here on Zoom as opposed to being in Hong Kong at an event meeting each other in the flesh. We are now all on Zoom. Everything is very remote. Digital signatures on documentation, digital board meetings, all that is acceptable and is now the rigor and is a day-to-day for us. Having said that, with all the uncertainty that we've seen vis-a-vis the financial system, the economy, with inflation creeping up now, the problems with the supply chain, all this uncertainty, what it has created is that the funding that generally is funneled towards digitalization has been somewhat thwarted. I mean, there are two bits to this, really. Some people seem to think that, yes, no, there is a return, and so the funding is as good as you're going to get it. But having said that, I think under less, personally anyway, I think under less uncertain environment, we would have seen a bigger growth.
Thank you very much. Michael, how about Vietnam?
Well, my firm, Vina Capital, is the biggest private equity in Vietnam. We're providing the funding, so maybe we should have a talk after the.
I have some candidates for you.
Well, we're obviously primarily investing in Vietnam. We have the gamut. We have listed equity funds, traditional PE, et cetera, but we also have the biggest venture capital, I believe the biggest venture capital investing group in the country. Myself, I went to business school at Stanford, and I also have MS engineering at Stanford. And my boss, Andy Ho, who's the CIO of the firm, is an MIT guy. So we're really deep into this stuff. By the way, we found that there was a lot of interest to, I don't know, maybe different countries at different, life cycle, whatever. But the main thing I would point out is that number one, which might be unexpected for people, is whatever you're experiencing in your home country, all the digitalization that happened over the last, year and a half, it's all happening in Vietnam as well. The World Bank did a survey here last year, and they found out that, and this is last year, that I think it was about 60% of the Vietnamese companies, I'm talking about all companies now, had either started engaging with the customers on via digital platform or had increased their degree of engagement, and that number will certainly be higher by now. As for us, what we're finding is some interesting fintech niches that we can go into. Payments is great, but I mean, there's just so much, Goldman's is in there, a bunch of guys are in there already. So we're finding little niche areas like, we call like insure tech, like a little niche that helps manage the insurance brokerage workforce, or property, help people, not quite Zillow, but something in the Zillow direction stuff, although we don't buy and flip houses. But we found that there's a bunch of little interesting niche things that we've been investing in. And the last thing I'll comment is that some of what we see happening in Vietnam, of course, a lot of it's just adoption of stuff that's happening in other countries. I think, who is it in Germany? I think Rocket Internet, they kind of pioneered that. So we see some of that happening. But the other thing that we see is, this is really interesting because Vietnam is obviously, we're just broke into the middle income. We're still kind of at the bottom end of the middle income bracket. So you see business models that would typically apply in lower income type areas, but using tech to kind of make it more efficient, speed it up, all this kind of stuff. And so what I'm thinking of specifically when I'm saying this is a company we didn't invest in, but a company that's essentially doing paycheck lending, but doing it more efficiently. Now everyone's got a QR code, so the whole identity stuff is sort of taken care of. You can use AI to sort out, who's a good risk, who's not, So it is a lot of stuff happening, but yeah, I wouldn't say there's kind of an overall theme. It's just, there's just pops of stuff going all over the place, but a lot of interesting things happening though. So.
Oh, many thanks. Let me move to Hong Kong. Julien, Hong Kong exchanges and clearing, of course, you're such a great IPO market, and I could ask you when you expect the fintech unicorns, to get listed and have very great successful IPOs. But maybe let me ask first, about the digital transformation and what you see in Hong Kong, what has changed, and maybe also for Hong Kong exchanges. I think for the exchange sector, it's basically the second digital transformation, right? The exchange sector had already in the 90s its first digital transformation, so to say.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me well first, and let me check. Yeah, all good. Well, digitalization, I think, with the last 2 years we've gone through, has been at the center of everything we're looking at, whether it's from a defensive point of view, like we sometimes are worried of the entire disruption that we have in the market, or even on an offensive way, and I'll come back to that. Clearly, from Hong Kong point of view, our role here as a connector, a super connector to China, is, digitalization in China is everywhere, from retail payments to retail brokers, in the financial industry, it's absolutely everywhere. So obviously we have a lot of, outputs of what's happening in China. Central bank digital currency, I know we are going to be talking about it, but probably my view is that it will happen in China first before it happens anywhere else. And it's probably going to happen in Hong Kong second, with the help of China. Now, in our market, obviously with a very strong IPO market that we continue seeing, there are a few aspects. First is we're seeing the digitalization of the brokers and of the financial industry in general. So a lot of old-style brokers are now being challenged by digital brokers who have infrastructure-based, real-time data, lots of services in order to access all across the globe. So what I found very interesting is that in this respect, while we have probably gone over the last 2 years in a model where governments have closed down a little bit one with the others, the financial industry and especially the digital trend has been about a globalization. So you can access Tesla shares here with digital brokers in Hong Kong pretty easily, but you can also access cryptocurrencies very easily out of Hong Kong, even though they're technically banned in China and they're not really regulated in Hong Kong yet. So the whole financial industry jumping into digital is something that I feel is absolutely important. No, so obviously for an exchange like us, which is operating the Hong Kong market with a lot of listing out of mainland, a lot of international listing, 150 new listing a year happen in Hong Kong, one of the largest IPO creation here. We have to be very agile and very cognizant of all of these changes. We need to adapt our own technology to our exchange participants and different types of customers and clients that are interfacing with us across the globe. And then we need to embrace the new trends. And the new trends are about shortening settlement cycles. You know, we used to do T+5 probably 20 years ago. We've moved to T+2, so 3 days in 20 years. Now, hopefully, we are with the digital and the DLT technology, we should be moving into T+0. That's the whole idea of atomic settlement through the CBDC in particular. So I think all of these things are just going to be absolutely massive in the next few years around digital currencies, around digital assets. And I would say one of the last points that I just want to make as an introduction to the panel is really the way that technology is going to sort out some of the very fundamental issues we have in front of us, in particular around ecology and the E in ESG, but even in the G in ESG. I think I feel like, you know, if you look at, for instance, carbon market, you know, whether it's voluntary or mandatory, there is a need for internationalization. There is a need for standardization, and blockchain technology can really help address that. Real-time checks and real-time green tech companies are going into this front very much here out of Hong Kong in order to track carbon emission, for instance, and real-time putting that on the chain in a very, very efficient way. So I think, you know, a lot of the issues we are trying in making especially this whole ESG world better is going to be addressed with all the digitalization that we're going through right now.
I can only concur. Makes a lot of sense, and atomic transactions, of course, in the exchange and capital market business, will make things much easier. You know, if you look at clearing houses, you know, collateral management, collateral which has been pledged, also internationally, and how difficult it is to fund trading in other jurisdictions and so on in that sense. Yeah, maybe we are moving into a much easier world and also cheaper world, because efficiency also will decrease the price. But let me ask you about the pandemic. So given that, you know, for me and many others, it's currently a little bit difficult to go to Hong Kong. Maybe give me your impression. You know, the pandemic, has it accelerated or rather hinder those development, digital transformation? What is your impression of someone who is in Hong Kong and can witness this with his own eyes?
The pandemic has had a huge accelerating effect. Simple things just as these Zoom meetings, these WebEx meetings. You know, I'm not trying to make any advertising around any systems. So the way that we are working has changed. That's one thing. And it's, even though all of us were moving into more working from home to some extent, and that was actually probably good for the environment in the long run with less traffic in the big cities and stuff. You know, this has just been a survival mode, right? So we've all been on survival mode in working online more and more. So that's the first aspect. But the second aspect is, with people being more online, we've discovered as well that a lot of the things that we used to do physically, we can also do online, right? And it's not only shopping, it's also trading stocks or participating in IPOs or in bond investments or buying my ETFs or my mutual funds. A lot of these things probably have been very, very much accelerated by the pandemic. And clearly in Hong Kong, with the situation we are in right now, it's been a very, very fast accelerator for us.
In the stock market, in retail, have you seen a strong increase? Because in Europe, I think the trading volumes from the retail has doubled or even tripled in some markets over the pandemic.
Absolutely. So We have not seen a drop in trading volume, far from it. We're now trading roughly $20 billion a day here in Hong Kong. And I think a few years ago when I started, we were trading less than 8. So it's really accelerated a lot. And it's not only that, it's also the penetration of, for instance, our listed equities here to a lot more distribution network, thanks to the digital brokers, or thanks to the improvements in our clearing participants or exchange participants reach into Southeast Asia, the US, Europe, and so on and so forth. So the trend has really been a globalization of our markets. Equity markets tend to be very local, right? But we've probably experienced one of the largest globalization of our markets, especially in the region, which is probably not yet where, for instance, US markets are, but we are getting there, I think, at some point.
Yeah. And then anyway, you have already that links, that global, okay, not global links, but the links to mainland China, for instance, with Stock Connect and Bond Connect and so on. So you can do much more. Let me ask you a final question before I move to Farah, because directly before the pandemic, the virtual banks and also subsequently the virtual insurances have started in Hong Kong. I guess they also have benefited from the pandemic, right?
They have, and obviously, not only in Hong Kong, but all across the globe, but clearly, yes, in Hong Kong, they've attracted a lot of interest. But Hong Kong is still a relatively small economy, so I think they will benefit more when economies will be a little bit more globalized and a little bit more open. So in this respect, they are fighting for the same, common ground of retail accounts here in Hong Kong over the 7.5 million inhabitants we have in Hong Kong. So they've gained market share against traditional banks. But I think what's going to be interesting is after we've put this pandemic behind us, is the way they will have in the new reach, and especially the reach around the Greater Bay Area, for instance, which is going to be a very strategic change for us, moving from serving 7.5 million people to serving 300 million people. Obviously, that changed entirely your banking system and your banking sector.
Yeah, well, it's fair to say it's also the other way around. The Greater Bay Area then also will have access to Hong Kong, right? So it means a little bit more competition. But anyway, Farah, let's move to you. So what was the impact of the pandemic on Malaysia or on Labuan in particular?
Malaysia has done an excellent job in trying to control the pandemic from a health point of view. So, with regards to vaccination and stuff, that's fine. Life is as per normal in Malaysia as pandemic as can be, right? Let's put it that way. And I think the government of Malaysia has done a fantastic job in adopting DLT as a platform technology. So, in all countries that we live in, whether it be Vietnam, Hong Kong, or Belgium, where you are, we all have this check-in system on our phones, right? The Malaysian check-in system is called My Sejahtera, and that runs on a DLT platform. You can't get a better proof of work or proof of concept than putting something as important and critical, because it carries your vaccination certs, it carries your check-in, check-outs, and all the rest of it on a DLT, albeit private, obviously, but on a DLT. So the government of Malaysia has really taken a very, very active approach towards digitalization, very open. With regards to Labuan, I mean, our ethos is that, in 2017, we were asked the existential question as to whether crypto, USDT-backed crypto, is deemed money, right? Do we accept that? And looking at the technology and stuff like that, we say, yes, actually we do. We do accept it. We have the benefit. I came from a domestic regulator. I worked for the stock exchange in Malaysia. So a lot of what Julien was talking about resonated with me. And, I think the transparency that the DLT provides in an exchange environment for the mom and pops, in China and Hong Kong, has been amazing towards price discovery. And that is global, right? That's global, that's everywhere. But in a unique position where Labuan is as a wholesale financial intermediation center, We have the ability to really be a lot more open and innovative towards our approach. So because we look at it and say, okay, it's all qualified investors, let's look at it and take it on and see where it's going to go, because there's no point fighting it, right? I think the point of default for a lot of regulators is something we don't understand, let's put it away somewhere. And I don't think we can afford to do that with digitalization. And I'm not even going to say fintech, because that's such a small sliver of what we're talking about. We're talking about a complete overhaul of everything we do, whether it be financial services or not. But what worries me actually is the gap. We assume everyone has access to a device. We assume everyone has access to the internet. That's not true. That's not true. You know, in ASEAN, that's not true. In Asia, that's not true. And my personal worry is that the divide is going to get larger and larger between the haves and have-nots. It's just that the gap is going to really grow, but the two lumps of the haves and have-nots are going to grow as well. There's going to be less in the middle, which I think, you know, over a long time is going to be more dangerous.
I agree. This is also why at the World Alliance we deal with topics like inclusive finance.
Yes.
On the other hand, you know, what we call fintech, financial technology, in many countries has helped. You know, look at China, look at several countries in Africa and so on. So, you know, people without a bank account suddenly at least had access to, you know, basic financial services, which they hadn't before, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's true. Like, for example, all this started in Kenya with M-Pesa. And that just absolutely leapfrogged, you know, a box standard bank situation, right? So it's a complete rejig of the philosophy of banking almost, right? So yeah, absolutely. But let's, you know, I mean, I think not a lot is being said about making sure everyone has access to internet. Everyone has access to a device in order to just create a level playing ground, right? Which is what we're trying to create.
Let me ask you about central bank digital currencies, because I cannot remember I heard much from Malaysia. Of course, you know, Singapore, the monetary authority, is quite active. In Hong Kong, the HKMA also, you know, very not to talk about the People's Bank of China. What's happening in Malaysia? You know, will we see a digital currency coming up in Malaysia too in this decade?
I hope so. I don't speak for the onshore regulator, which is the Central Bank of Malaysia, obviously. But I do hope so, because I think there will be then interoperability between these digital currencies, just as we have interoperability with fiat. So, you know, if we're not part of this, we're going to lose out, right? And so I think what you're going to find is there will be obviously first mover advantage for China. But, you know, at the risk of sounding controversial, it's easier to roll out something like this in China because of the control that's inherent in an environment like that. In a more laissez-faire environment, I think there's a lot more to be considered. I think as a trading nation, Malaysia has no choice but to adopt this as a standard for us to go forward, to be part of that global system. However, I think what we're going to probably do is have a wait and see attitude and then take on the best case and adopt it very quickly.
Farah, I have a question from the audience. Let me just read it. Can countries attract direct foreign investments via attracting fintech and financial related entrepreneurs, high net individuals, by offering residency or even subscription models for those who like mobility, decentralized finance, and so on? And is Labuan looking at that together with the authorities? And also, is the capacity building happening in Malaysia fast enough to cater to the technology sectors that have been growing? Oh, quite complicated.
That's a question and a half, isn't it? So digital nomads, yes, for sure. We haven't branded it the way Bermuda might have branded it as a digital nomad package. But yes, Malaysia offers a fantastic opportunity as a cost-efficient destination, right? And in the days that we live now, where economic substance is key, front and center, then what you need is actually a very facilitative regime, which is Labuan, with the ability to live in Malaysia, which we allow, right? So yes, 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 definitely. Are there any schemes to attract FDI into Malaysia? Yes, I mean, Malaysia, for example, has this fund, what we call Penjana, the Penjana Fund. I don't know if Michael knows of this. What happens is the government matches dollar to dollar for every fund a startup will be able to attract, and the funding is done by a Labuan fund. So yes, so that works. It's a dollar for dollar, and this is, you know, sometimes I think there are almost too many of these initiatives that it gets blurred, you know, it gets blurred. But I'm just giving you one example. We have also the Innovation Center within the Prime Minister's office. We have the Multimedia Development Corporation that gives you tax-free status as well. And I know that the Malaysian Industrial Development Authority, which is the onshore Invest Hong Kong or EDB Singapore equivalent, also has very dedicated digital initiatives. So yes, absolutely. Malaysia is a very digital friendly country.
Oh, this sounds highly interesting. I need to rethink my retirement plans because we have so beautiful spots there.
And the weather, yes, and the golf. Yeah, absolutely.
But Farah, you gave the link already to Michael and Vietnam, right? So
yes.
Michael, how is the situation in Vietnam? How the government, you're based in Ho Chi Minh City, if I remember correctly, you know, supporting entrepreneurs? Are there digital nomads coming to Vietnam? So how is the situation?
I think we cannot compete with Ecuador and Malaysia on that.
Oh, I love Vietnam. It's lovely. Why not?
No, I mean, the focus is different here. You know, we have the huge diaspora. So a lot of what's happening in the VC stuff is those guys coming back. And we don't really have like explicit programs to attract FDI because frankly speaking, there's just so much FDI. We're choking off FDI. There's so much coming already, but it's mainly in manufacturing, and all the VC stuff is just kind of happening organically. You know, the comments that you guys both made before me made me ping pong on one thing that I thought was interesting. You remember that when India did this whole demonetization, it ended up kind of spurring a whole bunch of other, you know, like mutual fund industry, blah, 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 kind of stuff. We have a mini version of that in Vietnam, which is now that everybody has to have the QR, you know, code to go everywhere. Your identity is like, for example, when you do e-commerce here, it's all COD. Like people don't trust the payments, you know. Well, now you have like, I think that things like e-commerce is really going to explode because you have a clear, you know, identifier, as you said, on the blockchain, you know. But the VC stuff is just kind of happening by itself, by local. Actually, when I first came to Vietnam, I taught in the national university in the mathematics department, like 10 years ago now. And a lot of my former students are now, you know, recontact with me, and they're doing all kinds of little interesting VC stuff here and there. And yeah, so there's a lot of stuff flourishing, but it's not by any kind of government design. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just happening by itself, kind of organically. So.
But don't call too much of the diaspora home. We need them. I'm based in Germany. We need them in Germany. They're one of the most hardworking people. Many of my friends are from Vietnam. Of course, their families are here for decades. And yeah, don't call them back, right? We need them here.
Well, when I first came here, I'm an ex-Lehman Brothers guy. So I came here after the Lehman Brothers collapse. And when I was teaching university in the math department, and I'm you know, putting stuff on the board that, like stochastic differential, things that these guys have never seen before. And they were literally correcting me in real time. Like, oh, I think you made a mistake there. And I was, oh my God, it's like very smart, hardworking people, you know? So.
Julien, let me come back to you. I want to discuss a little bit the topic of small and medium-sized enterprises. I know this is also a topic which is highly interesting for exchanges, how to help, how to finance, in particular when they're a grower. But on the other hand, in many countries, they were also hard hit by the pandemic. Not all the different industries, but some. And for instance, in Hong Kong, look at tourism and so on. So what is the situation? What has happened during the pandemic? And yeah, will there be any change, how to finance them in the future?
Domestic tourism obviously suffered a lot. I would say it very much depends on the industry. If there's a trend globally, I was looking at some figures. I think there's 1,400 unicorn in the world now, and if I recall well, there's one being created every 14 or 16 hours. So one thing that has really happened is capital goes where the trend is. And the trend is very much in fintech right now, and green tech and digitalization. So as long as you are in this industry, you are, flooded with capital, because we are still operating under very heavy US and European QE. So depending on the kind of industry you operate in, you'll have access to much easier capital. Obviously, for a stock exchange, we see this kind of industry. We also try to, we've made a lot of headways in biotech as well, even before the pandemic. There was a trend that we launched in 2015. And we've actually realized that some of those like specialist, new approach, new technology, were really looked at by investors very positively. And in a world where capital is relatively easy to get, at least at the top of the pyramid, like was mentioned by Farah, money goes into this industry quite easily. Now, obviously, we have the second part of the problem, which is some of the less regarded industries are suffering. So there are quite a lot of fintechs here in Hong Kong that are working and trying to facilitate SME financing. Especially the small companies are really struggling. There's a huge difference in the cost of money for a small company versus a medium fintech company. And again, huge discrepancies depending on the type of industry or type of new economy or old economy. So I think it's a difficult spot to be in. If you ask me, how can a stock exchange sort that out? Well, people, large corp, people who are really looking at liquidity, really wanting to get liquidity, will still go through IPO, and they will still come and list in the stock exchange. But now you end up having, for the, I would say, unicorn or decacorn, those guys go through rounds and rounds of fundraising. We're no longer stopping at a Series C. Some people go for Series E or Series D or even Series I, and they keep raising funds in the VC world or in the PE world without needing the liquidity from stock exchange. So I think we need to address that one way or the other, because unfortunately it's not always the same kind of industry and economy that operates there. Again, I think digital assets, digital asset custody, digital. There's a lot of crowdfunding platforms that start existing in order to deal with this kind of non-core industries or non-fancy industries, but which are absolutely critical in the normal economy of any country. So yeah, we are going to try and help, but obviously as a stock exchange, we have to deal with the people that have the highest requirements, the highest disclosure, and the biggest size. So that's where it gets a bit complicated to address that as a stock exchange.
Yeah, fully understand. For the startups, I think there are great offerings by the Hong Kong government. So I hope they're doing well. If you look at Cyberport or SciencePart and the subsidized programs there, I always found it, highly attractive what they offer in terms of rent compared to, the normal real estate market in Hong Kong. But yeah, for the SMEs, it's probably for some of them it's a little bit more challenging. And I understand that as a stock exchange, you cannot do too much in that direction. Farah, let me move, if you don't mind, to the topic of Islamic finance. And I'm curious to what extent this is an issue in Labuan, because I know Malaysia, of course, is a very strong, if not the leading hub worldwide in Islamic finance. What's happening there, and what has happened during the pandemic?
So Actually, it's quite interesting. So when we started this conversation, I explained that in Malaysia, there are two systems, the foreign system, which is Labuan, and then the onshore system, which is onshore Malaysia. And actually, Malaysia's growth in Islamic finance started in Labuan because we listed the world's first sukuk in Labuan as a test bed. So in a lot of what happens in Labuan then gets pushed back onshore once it works, right? And so, yeah, Islamic finance is something that Malaysia is known for. It is embedded into everything that we do. So there is always an Islamic option for all financial services within Malaysia. So like even at the stock exchange in Malaysia, if you look at the filters for Sharia filter, 80% or 85% of all our stocks are Sharia compliant. So yes, it's something that everyone does. How has the pandemic affected Islamic finance necessarily? I think what has happened is the pandemic has created people who care more. And so it's kind of created a situation, it's kind of created a situation where the inclusive element of the ESG has kind of merged with the Islamic ethos, as it were. So what you have is a double sleeve almost. So is it inclusive? Yes. Is it Islamic? Yes. And what you have is also Malaysian government funding, backing investments like this. So yes, Islamic finance continues to grow. As a jurisdiction, we have, we're very proud. Maybe we haven't talked it up enough, but what we are very, very proud of, a lot of what we've done on the inclusion space that also then works in the Islamic space. And I give you an example about, regional, at least wholesale financial intermediation. So maybe about 6 years ago, we helped list Sukuk, which is an Islamic bond for an Australian entity that was building solar farms in Indonesia. So you tick two boxes there immediately. It's Sukuk, which is Islamic, solar, which is the E in the ESG. So, and this was 6 years ago, right? But it just goes to show you the kind of regional wholesale financial intermediation a center like ours does, and how we have the ability to kind of encourage more inclusive, more ESG related investments or ethos within our license holders and our users, whilst at the same time ensuring that the Islamic leadership that we enjoy together with Malaysia continues along that thread.
No, this is very interesting. If I look at all the taxonomy discussion on ESG, of course, my immediate question is, will we see something like an ESGI, an I for Islamic finance, or will the I be part of the S?
No, I mean, I think that the I is part of the S and a part of the G as well, because there's a lot of governance that's required vis-a-vis Islamic finance. A lot of it comes out in the front. So like if you have, for example, any JARA structure or any kind of funding structure, the agreement as to the profit that the lender will take is set out in the beginning. So, and then it gets depreciated down, as it were, or appreciated up, depending on how you want to look at it. But yeah, so I think it's embedded. And that's why, this is my personal hypothesis again, I'm not sure we're going to find an ESGI because it's so woven into the S and the G. And I think the E is something probably that's even larger, that's a given within Islamic Sharia and Islamic scholars and philosophy.
This is an interesting area for fintech startups exploring this more because we see them in many jurisdictions collecting the data for this, also using artificial intelligence to fill the gaps and so on. Huh?
We're home. We've licensed this entity, which is a Malaysian entity called Ethis. Ethis is an Islamic fund. Okay, it's a wholesale fund. And what they do is they plant trees and they sell tokens or units, right? Towards the planting of this estate of trees to offset carbon. So it's already happening where there is a confluence between Islamic finance and the ESG principles.
this is very inspiring. I think we need to hear more of this and learn from each other how to do this in the best possible way. So, but maybe let me use that theme of sustainable finance and also ask Michael and Julien what's going on there, what's going on in Vietnam. I know a little bit what's happening in Hong Kong, but nevertheless, Julien, I will hand over after Michael to you as well to comment on this. Michael, please.
Well, I think it's a little bit too early for Vietnam to have formal, sustainable finance. But what I would say is that there's a lot of activity around electricity generation and doing this in a more ecologically friendly way. So, for example, Vietnam had, a massive, I can't even remember the numbers, they went up so quickly, massive build out of solar from I think late 2019 until about now. And I'm not an electricity guy, so I can't remember the numbers, but it is maybe 15% of our total generation capacity right now. Right now we have and Vina Capital was one of my firm was one of the ones that was big in that. They're basically zero for wind. We're just starting to ramp that up. I think it's very likely that there will be no new coal-fired plants announced. Again, Vina Capital pioneered, there was a project that was meant to be a coal plant, and we went in and we converted it to an LNG plant. That's a $3 billion project, 3,000 megawatts. There are some coal-fired plants that are in the process of being constructed, but I don't think there'll be any new ones launched. And then the other thing I'll mention,
moved out, right? So after in Glasgow, at least they announced,
yeah. And by the way, we took the PM to all those meetings and stuff. And the last thing, I'm not trying to sound like an advertisement for my firm. I love working here, so no reason not to advertise them. But we're also setting up with EDF in France a renewable energy platform, which, in my understanding, they're targeting like 1.5 gigawatts of renewable, and I guess some of that will be wind, I just mentioned, and over about 7 years horizon, something like that. So it's not kind of overarching, there's just pockets of, and we're not the only ones. There's other people too that are raising money for specific projects that are ecologically friendly. So
but wouldn't that be a nice showcase for the government, also to attract more foreign investment and so on in those projects? So put it together, having the right umbrella, so many financial centers marketing themselves now as green financial center, sustainable financial centers, hub for financing those developments.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a little bit more of a very clear, concerted, like, okay, we're not going to do any more coal. There are people in the government saying we're not going to do any more coal, and then others saying, well, we might have to. And but my personal feeling is I would really prefer that we just had a strong hard line on that, because it's not necessary. There are tons of wind here, there's tons of solar power, et cetera. So, but so far there hasn't been like a unified approach, which would make it easier to finance all that. So,
Julien, to you, what's happening in Hong Kong in sustainable finance, and what role Hong Kong exchanges and clearing plays in it?
Well, it's a huge question, to be honest. I think first of all, we happily joined the Glasgow Net Zero Alliance and the Infrastructure Net Zero Alliance during the COP26, officially joined them. We're part of the Stock Exchange Sustainable Groups as well. These are a lot of words, but the reality is there's a lot of things that are going to happen in Hong Kong. The HKMA is already one of the largest issuer of green bond in the world, probably after Banque de France. And they have a program. They will keep issuing. They will keep financing renewable projects or projects in order to improve life in Hong Kong, or technology, tech-based or nature-based solutions here in Hong Kong. We just released a study on a project about retail green bond STOs, which would be accessible to investors, retail investors in Hong Kong, to track their carbon footprint and offset their carbon footprint. So You look at it from every single angle, it is going to be big. We're working with the government and making sure that we have the right talents in Hong Kong in order to address. This is a huge problem. You have a lot of talents when it comes to green financing and understanding the taxonomy and understanding implication of it in some other IFCs, but Hong Kong needs to really beef up and maybe attract more and more people, especially out of Europe, in order to help them out. We need to train people, so we're working as well with the Hong Kong UST universities here in order to train and create more and more program around ESG, and more students are taking it. Even senior citizen of HKEX are taking it as well and making sure. But at the end of the day, the opportunity is very much around the China 30-60 strategy and the overall decarbonization. It's what is very hard for me to reconcile is overall the entirety of all the standards that are being set up and the complexity in the taxonomy, whether it's for carbon, whether it's for green bonds, whether it's for green loans. I mean, everybody's trying to do something and help out, right? Everybody. And I think that's great. But at some point, we just need to agree with one another. And we also need to realize there are some specificities in certain areas in the world, and Asia being one in particular, vis-a-vis Europe or the US, right? So getting together, getting those standards ready, at some point we do need to foster those very high fancy blue finance, nature-based solution projects that everybody wants to invest in from a communication point of view. But at the end of the day, we need to reduce carbon creation. And at the end of the day, a ton is a ton. So we need to work on making sure that we reduce carbonization of real estate, or projects, or energy, or import-exports, or harbor, and obviously all the industry that we use for exporting imports, where Hong Kong is so strong as well. Same thing for the Greater Bay Area. A huge thing that we need to address. All the all the garments industries and a lot of energy production. We absolutely have to find ways in order to address local problems with global standards. And if we can't address the global standards, then we need to do something even locally to make a difference. So we are highly committed to this, but not just us, is the entire IFC in Hong Kong, which is highly committed to this. As I mentioned, all our HKMA, SFC, or regulators, the FSTB, or government, everybody's moving in this direction and making headway. We need to move from talks into actions, and I think this is really going to be happening soon. Just word of advice. We have a December 9th Global Asia, Green Asia conference, which we'll be hosting. We hope to attract as many people to talk about all those green tech and all those green taxonomy issues, especially when we look at Asia in particular.
Mm-hmm.
You're all welcome to join.
Before the pandemic started, the central government in Beijing was keen to unify the carbon compliance markets in various Chinese cities. And maybe also carbon credit will be a topic for exchanges or marketplaces in a broader sense. Is that something Hong Kong Exchange is also looking at, and maybe becoming later part of a unified system of Greater China?
I personally would love to. Obviously, we are engaging with Beijing authorities, with the GBA authorities, and also with our local government here in Hong Kong as to how we can be participating both in the mandatory and the voluntary market. But clearly, there's been a huge progress on the allowance market in China with the launch of the National Emission Exchange in Shanghai during the summer. And the target to integrate the biggest of the Chinese emission into allowances in order to really reach a limit by 2030 and net zero by 2060. This is going to be critical. There's another 8 local Chinese emission exchanges. 2 of them are in the Greater Bay Area, one in Guangdong and one in Shenzhen. So there are lots of ideas that we can work on in order to improve or make Hong Kong participate, right?
Yeah, this would be a wonderful case for the Greater Bay Area doing something together, right? So,
Sure, but we can even go beyond that, right? Being in Europe, you see the efficiency of the allowance market in Europe, which is the biggest in the world, and this has really had an impact on the EU, carbon footprint altogether. So interfacing with Europe is something that we might want to do at some point. So it's a little bit it's a little bit complex because allowances market tend to be local closed loop systems. But what has happened in Europe with integration of more and more country ETS into the EU ETS is an example that I feel like we can look at in Asia in particular.
Mm-hmm. Farah, I see you nodding a lot. Anything to add from Malaysia?
No, I mean, I think COP26 was fantastic. And I think there's a lot to be said about China and India not signing on to that carbon deadline. However, I'm just at a loss as to why we can't agree on carbon price. And I think that's such a shame. Because at the end of the day, unless we have some kind of clarity with regards to how we're going to structure a standardized carbon contract, how we're then going to trade it, what kind of settlement, how is that going to work globally? Then you've got pockets of things that are not working, and then you've got so much leakage. And that's the last thing you want, because we're here talking about technology and how great digitalization is and how DLT provides transparency. But yeah, at the same time, I'm wondering whether there's real will to do this, because why can't we agree on a carbon price and how this contract's going to work? I mean, Julien and I both work at exchanges. Well, he still does. I used to. We understand a contract is just a contract, and we all agree, sign on to it, agree on a settlement, and have a mutual recognition, and we can run a carbon contract. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too simplistic. Maybe I'm just disappointed. I don't know. But it is logical, and then you can have intermediation centers like ours, like IFCs everywhere in the world, like Labuan and your members, Jochen, where we can then clear it at a wholesale level, right? After a domestic settlement system, we clear it at a wholesale level, where then it moves country to country. And then whether it be carbon capture or after that, maybe planting more trees, whatever, making sure there's proper audit, that's where the technology comes in as well, to make sure it's there, everything is there. So, whatever happens at COP, whatever happened was great, but I just think it's not enough.
For the compliance market, I concur. This is not too complicated. I think carbon credits, maybe it's a little bit more challenging because this is not a one-time thing, right? So if there, you create a new forest, you get credit for that. You of course, the forest should be there in 5 years or also in 10 years, right?
Yeah, but that's the idea of it. But that's the beauty of technology, isn't it? It's supposed to enhance transparency. So, let's use it.
Yeah. Let me.
So the answer is disclosure-based technology.
Everything that you guys are saying right now, I'm going to offer my trader's hat. I mentioned I'm an ex-JP Morgan Lehman Brothers trader. Everything that you said all means one thing: buy carbon credits.
Yeah, absolutely. Long.
This is going up
long
for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Markets always start. It always look at Bitcoin. In the beginning, it was a complete mess, and this goes up. As it gets more clear, as the problems you're talking about get solved, the price goes up.
Yeah.
Oh, bye.
Yeah, you just make sure that you get it certified, and then later you can sell that credit. This is the issue, right? So and like Farah said, a global standard or at least regional standard would be helpful. That you're not relying on maybe one market where the goods are underpriced. You see on the credit side, there's huge differences. I know from Europe, sometimes, one credit, so to say, is 100 times more expensive than the other credit, depends on what you're doing, right? So, and normally we should have a single price for this. I think we have a few more minutes. Let me finally move to two more topics. On one hand, maybe Farah, in your place, you need to find the right talent, right? You need to train them. In other markets like Hong Kong, it's maybe also retraining, reskilling exercise, because for all what we talked about in the last hour, we need to have different skills, right? So this is not the classical job in the financial industry. This requires a lot of knowledge on technology, maybe AI. You should know Python and so on and so forth, right? So, or you need to be familiar with ESG. Sustainable finance experts are scarce. So what you're doing there, maybe Farah, with you to start in Malaysia to build up that talent, and maybe Julien to follow, to retrain or reskill, the person in the financial industry. Maybe Julien, for you, with a focus on what you need at the exchange. Farah, please start.
Sorry, what did you say? Python? Is that a snake? No, that's a joke. Talking about talent, no, it's crazy. I mean, Malaysia, and I've said this and I've been quoted saying this so many times, Malaysia's best export is its people. And the biggest problem with that is that growing Malaysia requires to have its people back. And I think, the challenge is, so for example, a classic, and very much like Vietnam as well, I'm sure Michael will agree that there is a massive diaspora of Malaysians in Hong Kong, Malaysians in Europe, and Singapore, and all the rest of it. And we want them to come back. We need talent. We obviously are trying to build talent from ground up, but the pace at what, at how things are moving, we can't. We can't wait for these guys to, go through the system, as it were. That's one thing. But I think this is where digitalization helps. And this is where I think the idea and how the pandemic has changed how we look at things. I mean, I just had a performance appraisal with one of my direct reports, and she's 45, and she's decided she's going to retire. Because the pandemic has created this sense of, what is it all about after all? Right? And with remote working, you can still work from wherever you are. So yes, talent is challenging, but I think the way we tackle retaining, maintaining, and cultivating talent is going to have to change as well. So we're going to have to be a lot more relaxed about whether they're in or not, where it's going to be about delivery, it's going to be about job satisfaction. I'm going to create next year a Zoom-free day for everyone. It's just a Zoom-free day.
Good luck.
You're not allowed to get on Zoom. And this is a very selfish thing, because I want a Zoom-free day, right? I want 7 of these things a day, and I'm tired. But a Zoom-free day, like the way Google's got 20% of your time to do something you're passionate about. I think those are the soft things that will attract people back to Malaysia, for example, because Malaysia is a great place and you want to live in Malaysia. And if there is allowance for remote access and stuff like that, that's even better. That's the cherry on the cake. For Labuan, we have been very lucky in the sense that Labuan is part of Malaysia. Malaysia has a huge hinterland where, employees can come from, and, we're not a typical island jurisdiction, as it were, right? We have the whole backing of the Malaysian financial system. We have the backing of the Malaysian government. We have 30 million people. So, in that sense, talent for Labuan specifically, not that difficult, I have to admit. Having said that, having to grow our digital offering and getting the talent towards that has been challenging. Yes.
Julien.
A mixture of things. Obviously, we are not dealing with the people that are in university now in the same way as we were dealing with people like me when I was out of university probably 25 years ago. So we are not driven, those people are not driven by the same thing. I think things like, ESG, I'm coming back to ESG, I'm sorry, but, things like ESG themed training are things that attract a lot of these Generation Z, and really that's one thing that can be a differentiator. in terms of digital, obviously in Hong Kong with our very close neighbors in Shenzhen, we are basically sitting in the we're very lucky. We're sitting in the Silicon Valley of China, right? So the amount of talent that exists and the amount of super high profile tech company that exists either in Hong Kong or on the other side of the border is huge. So getting them in and out is obviously it's a bit more complex right now with the pandemic, but in a normalized world, it should be pretty easy. So attracting talent is not difficult. Our local universities are good, and they're also reshaping a lot of what they do to either, we have good training in terms of tech and IT and technology specialists. And then we have this ESG angle as well, which is really pushed by the government, which is very, very important. And then there's so much opportunity, right? All the Connect models we have, the Greater Bay Area Connect, wealth management, Stock Connect, Bond Connect. There's so much interface. We are a small country, but we have such a big, interface between the world and China that there will be always, jobs for everybody, and it's going to be very attractive to come to Hong Kong and do all of these things. And when people in the industry, in the financial industry in particular, are going to be relentless to continue making those things happen, with the angles of where the economy and the earth is heading, which is very important as well.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask one closing question for all three of you before we finish the discussion. You need to look into your crystal ball. 2030, maybe then the largest part of the digital transformation will be over. So what will be the three main things your financial center, your place will stand for in 2030 and in terms of the financial industry. So how will maybe Julien, you start, how will Hong Kong look like in 2030? What the people will think about Hong Kong as a financial center internationally?
That's a really tough one. I do hope that we'll have a core role in facilitating green finance. So I think that has to be one of our priorities in building up. So whether we are, sitting on a global repository for voluntary carbon offset globally, or whether we actually have a lot of crowdfunding platforms or primary market platforms for financing carbon reduction or nature-based solution projects is something I really would like to see. I think exchanges of goods are going to be evolving as well. So the role of the shipping industry and its weight in the overall world will evolve. So we'll need to adapt to that. I think there will be more local production and more local consumption. I think I still think that we are one of the wake-up call of the pandemic is that maybe there was a little bit too much globalization in terms of exchanges. What is the point of me making a Christmas tree come from the US to put in my flat in Hong Kong? That makes no sense. We got to stop these kind of things, right? So I think there will be a lot more local consumption, local creation, and I think there will be. If I want to have one last bet, it's probably more like the robotics cars and the overall AI-based driving, which I feel is probably going to become pretty big. I mean, electric vehicles are already a very, very big thing in Hong Kong, but I think they're only a first step towards independent cars or maybe more better way of transiting between your home and work, and probably also working also a little bit more remotely, but hopefully not every day on Zoom.
For me, it would be enough a car which reminds me driving on the right side. Whenever I'm in Hong Kong. Michael, 2030 Vietnam in finance. What can we expect?
Well, this is more a story about just the general development of the country rather than the digitalization. I mentioned earlier that we had just sort of popped up until the very lower end of the middle income bracket. So by 2030, we'll be bumping up against the upper end of the middle income bracket. Hopefully, we won't get caught in the middle income trap. It's a little hard to describe verbally, but we did a chart because similar to what Julien was mentioning before, our volume also doubled basically this year. Stock market trading volume, number of accounts doubled. But we did this little chart where you looked at where Taiwan was in its evolution, and Vietnam is just sort of following exactly the same, but we're still back where Taiwan was back in like 1980 or something. So it's less about digital transformation and just the normal emerging middle class, you know, all that sort of story. Yeah.
Farah, we started with you. You're the last one. You have the last words. Please keep yourself brief because we are already 1 minute over the time. How will Labuan and how will Malaysia look like in 2030 in financial services after the digital transformation?
I hope we keep our Islamic leadership. I hope we then thread in the ESG element very strongly. That's generally Malaysia. Labuan, I hope Labuan is able in 10 years to really embrace decentralized finance. I think in a space of decentralized finance, all these DAO exchanges and DeFi and AI and AI running it and all the rest of it, I think there is going to be an opportunity for a financial center to be home to what we would traditionally, and maybe Julien and I would traditionally call an unregulated exchange, which is a peer-to-peer exchange transactional model. I think that would be very interesting for an international financial center. I think it would be perfect for wholesale financial intermediation, especially for the sophisticated investors. So that's where I'd like to see Labuan in the next 10 years. Many
thanks for all your insights. The downside of Zoom webinars is we cannot give you a round of applause. So it's me.
I thought it was the tea. I thought it was the tea that I don't get to have.
With that, back to Mike.
Sorry, thank you, everybody. The problem with Zoom is you can't see the mute button sometimes as well. But thank you so much. What a fascinating dialogue. And I really like the end point there from Farah about embracing decentralized finance, which is going to be the counter, I guess, to China mainland centralized system as we go forward.
That's the biggest problem at the moment, right? So where do financial centers sit within a deregulated system? And yet systems that are unregulated still need a platform which centralizes it. So that's the oxymoron bit of it all.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
Just don't take any advice from your nomads that you're attracting to Malaysia. They would not want anything centralized.
Yeah, they'll be sat in Langkawi having margaritas at midday or something, as they do.
It's true that some of these digital nomad types, I mean, they're almost evangelical, like almost overhyping things a bit. But this is really real. I mean, you think about so many applications, like, since we have tons of import export here, custom clearance is a nightmare. I mean, blockchain is just all that trade finance,
everything,
all going to get, solved, boom, like that. In fact, Jochen, I think when we talked beforehand, you were talking about some interesting ideas of like the possibility of having RFID and you could sense whether the inventory is actually there, or, there are going to be so many different things that happen and change, so amazing.
So I guess the conclusion is it's an ongoing dialogue that we'll need to put in the diary and catch up with each other every 6 to 9 months. It's happening that fast.
Yeah.
If not, getting quarterly updates offline as well. So with that, thank you so much. I just want to highlight to everybody that we have one more session, which is not one of the free sessions, unfortunately, but it is the end of a whole week that's been going on, and that's at the Horasis Asia Meeting 2021 that PBEC is supporting as an official co-organizer. And we're on at 10:30 in the morning, Hong Kong, Singapore time. And you're more than welcome to join if you feel you wish to join that whole program. It is an all-day affair. I know it's not for everybody, but there's going to be a lot of over 400 speakers from across the world involved in that.
It sounds really exciting, but I've got a board meeting. Is there going to be videos recorded and stuff like that?
This session will be given to PBEC, yes. So this particular session, I'm guessing some others will also be provided, but I wouldn't say all of it will be free, because it's going to be Dr. Richter's way to make some money through his subscription model. But there we go. Yeah, so tomorrow we're on a slightly different theme, obviously going a little bit more around private-public partnerships and some of the more bigger projects around this, and talking to the Financial Services Agency of Japan, IFC, ADB, and Shinhan Financial, which is obviously a very large conglomerate out of Korea going into Southeast Asia, which probably Michael's aware of, in Vietnam as well. So, well, thank you, everybody. And all of our, if you like, all of our content this week has been recorded and is going out, drip feeding out every 48 hours. So if you missed any of the sessions earlier in the week, just visit our YouTube official channel. You can zap the QR code there, or you can just go to YouTube and search PBEC-Pacific Basin Economic Council. And likewise, if you're using LinkedIn, then you can do this.
I gotta go. Thanks a lot. All right, bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.